Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video from a smaller channel, and I actually struggled with whether or not to include a link back to the original video for this one because their channel is just so tiny. I don't want to overwhelm them. But in the end, I decided that I'm going to trust my audience. I trust that any of you who decide to go to the original video will be mindful of the fact that I have a significantly larger audience than they do, and so will be respectful should you decide to comment. Anyway, this video was sent to me by my patron Schmanky, and it's got a rather unique take on the God argument. I mean, not really, but that joke will make sense in a bit. Let's go!
A masterpiece is a one-of-a-kind creation. Like the Mona Lisa, there are many copies, but there is only one original. The original has a certain distinguishable trait that cannot be duplicated.
Well, I mean, if you're going to say that a masterpiece is something that can never be perfectly copied, then maybe the Mona Lisa wasn't the best example? Just a few months ago, a forgery was sold at auction for several $1,000,000, and it was so good of a forgery that for a time, art historians were actually considering the possibility that it was the original. And this is plausible since the original was stolen in the early 1900s, so a good enough forgery could potentially have been passed off as the original. In the end, the one that sold at auction was determined to have been painted in the 1600s, about a century after Da Vinci painted his.
When you study this masterpiece, you know who the creator was. It was Leonardo da Vinci. Did you know that you are a masterpiece? Do you realize that the very minute you were born, the very minute you were born, 250 other babies were born. When you were born, you were not a copy or a clone, you were an original. You have a DNA structure that is totally different from any other of those 250 babies.
Unless one of those 250 babies happens to be your identical twin, then there's a pretty good chance that your DNA is identical. About 12% of identical twins have some minor genetic variation that still leaves them functionally identical, but my point is that identical twins are a thing that exists, and in most cases the genetic material is the same for identical twins. So this whole every baby has unique DNA stuff is nonsense. But even if it weren't, given the average number of genes found in human DNA, there are approximately 7 times 10 to the 13th possible combinations of alleles in the human genome. For comparison, an estimated 117 billion people have existed throughout all of human history. That's a couple of orders of magnitude less than the number of possible genetic combinations for any given human. This means that, thus far, we've only used up about 0.17% of the possible allele combinations, meaning that just by random chance alone, it is far more likely that a newly fertilized egg will have one of the 99.83% of all potential genomes that have not been used yet than one of the 0.17% that have, because that's how numbers work.
If DNA is not enough to prove intelligent design, we will examine 4 other original characteristics that were given to you at birth. They are so unique that they can be used to protect your identity.
Okay, that's great. But the ultimate question that this leaves me with is, if something being unique means that that thing had to have been created by God, then what does that say about things that are not unique? Every electron, for instance, is identical, nothing unique about it, to the point where some scientists have actually speculated that only one electron exists, but it is not temporally bound, and so it pops back and forth in time, thus our perception of multiple electrons. My point is, the quality of unique is a binary. Either something is unique, or it is not. And both unique and non-unique things exist in the universe. So why would the existence of unique things be evidence for God? Would the existence of non-unique things not then serve to counteract this evidence? Have we determined why something having the quality of uniqueness points to a god, and not just to the idea that random combinations of a large number of factors will more probably lead to unique outcomes than non-unique outcomes?
How can you prove there is a God or a creator by simply using a digital device? My name is David Benoit, and I would like to welcome you into the world of the unexplainables.
I feel like I've already explained it, though, and we haven't even gotten to your intro yet. There are a lot of things in the universe that are, at this time, unexplainable. Maybe pick one of them rather than picking stuff with easy explanations?
You are about to enter a place where we will investigate how supernatural involvement is the only explanation for certain natural occurrences. The only logical reason for these phenomena is the God of the Bible. You are about to enter the world of the unexplainables.
I unironically love that intro and hope that he continues with this series, though I certainly do hope that his arguments get better than the one we see here.
Every day, we are told that there is no creator. We are a product of evolution.
Being the product of evolution does not automatically mean that there was no creator. I mean, it definitely brings up a lot of questions regarding the creation account found in the Bible and the implications for original sin and all that, but given how much evidence there is for evolution, you would be better off finding a way to make evolution fit with your theology than trying to deny science for the sake of your theology.
In this video, we will show how unique the body really is and how impossible it would be for random creation.
Well, that's interesting given the fact that the uniqueness of our bodies is literally the direct result of randomness. Now, sure, if you were aiming for any one particular genome out of the trillions of possible combinations, then the odds of getting that one specific genome are minuscule, but when the odds of any of them are approximately equal, then no matter which one you end up with, it had an equal chance of occurring as all the other ones. Now, of course, there are factors that make some genomes more probable than others, and which genome is produced as a result of any particular couple mating is constrained by the genomes of the parents, so in reality not all combinations are equally likely, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still random chance that makes a unique genome far more likely than a duplicate.
We will show how modern technology and security systems use the uniqueness of your body to protect your identity. Could it be possible that these scientific breakthroughs were predicted in the Bible?
No, I don't really think that that is possible, though I am curious to find out which verses get interpreted to be referring to such things. But really, more impressive than any of this would be if the Bible actually contained instructions for designing such systems. Not only would that be more impressive, that would actually have been useful. But to the best of my knowledge, nobody even makes such claims.
Identity theft is a major problem in our world today. Daily, people have their information stolen and put on the dark web for sale. To stop some of these problems, manufacturers have always been looking for a way to protect your privacy.
Sorta, but a lot of companies are more interested in selling your private data themselves, but that's not what this video is about, so I'm not going to get into that right now.
The most common way of protecting your privacy is by using your own body. What is more impressive, a group of Silicon Valley scientists that design a security feature to be used on your mobile device to identify you from nearly 8 billion people on this planet? Or the creation of a body so unique that it can be used to protect your device?
I'd say that the people who design the systems that do the protecting are way more impressive than the design of the unique thing itself. If I grab a lump of clay and just randomly smush it around, I will produce a blob that is most likely unique from any other blob of clay, and if developers so desired, they would be able to design a system that could recognize my blob from other blobs. But designing my blob took almost no effort, while designing the system to do the recognition could potentially have taken hundreds of hours of work by teams of developers, all of whom had to spend years in school learning what they needed to be able to design this blob recognition software.
There are approximately 350,000 births a day globally. Each finger has its own unique print.
That would only be impressive if you could first tell me exactly how many fingerprints are possible, because I feel like that's an even bigger number than how many human genomes are possible. Now, Quora is generally a pretty bad place to go for answers to questions, but often you can find these hypothetical math questions being given some pretty decent guesstimates, and for this particular question, we find that under the assumption that the fingerprint area is 2.5 by 2.5 centimeters, and that for each 4 millimeter squared area of the fingerprint, there can be one of 3 events for a fingerprint ridge. Either it will split, stop, or continue. This ends up with 2.7 times 10 to the 74th potential fingerprints. Of course, this admittedly ignores a lot of stuff like the fact that the neighboring 4mm squares likely have an impact on what will happen in the next 4mm square, so let's just be cautious and assume that these factors eliminate 99.99% of all the results, which then leaves us with a possibility of 2.7 times 10 to the 70th potential fingerprint combinations. Meaning that there's even less of a chance of finding someone with the same fingerprints as you than there is of finding someone with the same DNA as you. Like, significantly.
3.5 million unique prints every day.
Or, to put it another way, 1.3 times 10 to the negative 62nd percent of the total potential unique prints, given some extremely conservative estimating.
The fingerprint, in over 100 years of using fingerprint for identification, there has never been a recording of a duplicated fingerprint.
And given how few people have existed over the past 100 years when compared to how many potential fingerprints there are, this is completely unremarkable.
Statistically, how hard would it be for evolution to create a code embedded in your human fingerprint that could never be reproduced?
And here's where it actually gets a bit fun. We don't know exactly what causes fingerprints. But one thing is pretty much certain. It is a combination of genetic factors and external factors. The current accepted idea of fingerprint formation is that the middle skin layer gets smushed between the dermis and the epidermis, creating the ridges. Whatever the ultimate cause may be, we know that they are partially genetic and partially environmental, but the prints themselves are fully determined by the time a fetus is 17 weeks old. Environmental factors that are known to be able to affect fingerprint development include blood pressure, blood oxygen levels, nutrition, hormone levels, the position of the fetus in the uterus, the composition and density of the amniotic fluid around the fingers, how the fetus moves its hand, and how hard it pushes against other objects in the uterus. These differing environmental factors mean that even with identical genetics, the two babies will have different fingerprints because they won't have experienced all of these factors in an identical manner at an identical time. So really, evolution didn't have to do anything to make our fingerprints unique. It's just a byproduct of the fact that the circumstances in which a fetus develops will always be at least somewhat unique, even if it is two or more fetuses developing in the same womb.
The answer is simple. It's impossible.
Now, given what we know of fingerprint formation, it's not that there is some unique gene sequence that determines the uniqueness of the fingerprints, it's the environment in which the fingerprints develop. It would actually be better proof of God if we knew how fingerprints formed, knew how improbable it was for them to all be identical, but for them to all be identical anyway.
Now you may ask me the question, what about people who are born without fingerprints?
No, honestly, that question didn't even occur to me. I'm not sure how that would be helpful to either of our points. I mean, really, if anything, if we're assuming that fingerprints are evidence for intelligent design, then the instances where people don't have fingerprints are evidence against intelligent design. So I guess it's slightly helpful for my side, but it wouldn't be a hill that I'd be willing to die on either way.
Well, there are about 6 cases of people born without a fingerprint worldwide.
I mean, how many people have this condition is kind of irrelevant, but also you're wrong. There are at least 3 genetic disorders that can lead to lack of fingerprints. For dermatoglyphia, there have been 4 families that have been diagnosed, with one of the families having at least 8 confirmed cases. So that's more than what you're saying just right off the bat. Dermatopathia also causes people to lack fingerprints, and there have been 10 confirmed cases since 1992. So that one is significantly more rare, but it's still more than you're saying exist. But Naegeli syndrome is a thing as well, and I couldn't find data on exactly how many people have it, which to me says that, while rare, it's common enough that it doesn't get the additional specification of exactly how many people are known to have it. So to not have fingerprints is incredibly rare, but nowhere near as rare as you're making it out to be.
Out of the 8 billion people on this planet, only 6 do not have fingerprints. Doesn't that prove that there is no God?
No. Why would it?
No, quite the contrary. If there was not an intelligent designer, you would have millions of people without fingerprints, partial fingerprints, or duplicates.
So, is your argument here that God exists because he's only a little bit incompetent while designing fingerprints? Because that's actually a really bad argument.
Instead, there are only 6. Now, why? You might say, maybe God wanted him to be a spy. I don't know. Or maybe they'll just have to use a password.
So, maybe God wanted them to be a spy, Because having a genetic disorder that usually gives you brittle bones as well is a better way to hide your fingerprints while engaged in espionage than, just wearing gloves? Or maybe God just wanted to be a jerk to those handful of people, specifically making it so that they have to use passwords. That's a bit of a weird choice, and again, makes God out to be a jerk. Is this where you want to go with this?
Let's look at another part of the body so distinctive to you, and only you, that it can be used as a security feature to prove your identity.
Oh, okay. So no actual explanation for the fingerprintless people? Just maybe God wants them to use passwords instead of fingerprints for reasons unknown and then move on to the next one? Great.
Your face. Facial recognition shows the uniqueness of everybody's face.
I mean, there are external factors that can have an impact on facial structure as well, but since most people have completely unique genetics, it would be really surprising if all the physical features that result from these genetics were not also unique. So if we assume that facial structure is 100% genetic, then we would expect facial structure to be just as unique as the genome that caused it.
If fingerprints was not enough to prove that there is an intelligent designer, in 2017, Apple took it a step further. They introduced facial recognition as a personal security feature on their iPhone and iPad.
Didn't Microsoft implement Windows Hello in 2015 when Windows 10 was released? Maybe I'm wrong, maybe that was a later patch and Apple was the first, but given Apple's history of being the second company to implement something and then being heralded as taking brave, bold, new steps for implementing this new thing, I'm going to go ahead and give this point to Microsoft.
With a 3D map of your face, that's 30,000 invisible infrared dots, they can identify you from any other person in the world.
Except your identical twin sibling.
Yes, do it. Oh, no! And I'm in! Bitch, I'm in.
And in some instances, your non-identical non-twin sibling who just happens to look a lot like you. Now, don't get me wrong, facial recognition as implemented in smartphones today is actually more secure than using fingerprints, not because faces are more unique than fingerprints, but rather because there is a smaller margin for error in the recognition end of things.
With 7.6 billion faces on the Earth today, that's pretty creative.
I mean, if each face were handcrafted, then yes, you might say that. But if each face were determined by genetics which are determined somewhat randomly from an effectively infinite pool of uniqueness, then why would we not expect to find similar uniqueness in these faces with absolutely no creative input required?
Even twins can be identified by their mother. There's always some difference in that facial structure.
Fun fact, the pair of identical twins who played Fred and George in the Harry Potter movies would occasionally switch roles to see if anyone noticed, and there are actually scenes that made it into the final movies where they successfully pulled off the switch.
Then we go another step. Retinal scans are the most reliable of all identification marks of the human body.
Yep, it sure is. I actually had a bit of fun with that one. I got my current phone, the Galaxy S9, around the same time as an old coworker of mine who's a diehard Apple guy got the iPhone X. He was bragging about the FaceID thing, so I got to point out that my phone uses retinal scans to log me in, which are more secure. Just don't tell him that it was actually using iris scans, not retinal scans, which I learned later are not the same thing as retinal scans. Which should have been obvious, because one scans the retina and the other scans the iris? Yeah. Wait, did I just accidentally give you another thing that's unique about the human body and so therefore must be the result of intelligent design? Well, shit. Guess I'll just go ahead and convert to young Earth creationism then. Y'all can ignore all the stuff I've said in previous videos about wishing I didn't have morals because of how much atheist conversion stories are worth in apologetic circles. I'm a Christian now.
Retinal security scans has proven its capability in implementing reliable biometric security protocols in various high-risk sectors like border, patrol, and aviation.
I actually used to work in a computer repair shop that had a retinal scanner. Not that they actually used it, they were a certified drop-off spot for e-waste recycling, so it was a broken retinal scanner from, I think it was from border security. And because of extra security measures, they didn't recycle the hard drives with the actual retina prints or software to run the scanner at the same facility as the scanner that can interact with those retina prints. So I've never actually used a retinal scanner, but I did work where we had one. The boss there liked to collect odd things that were supposed to be recycled. He even had a set of probes that looked an awful lot like the medical probes from Idiocracy.
This goes in your mouth. This one goes in your ear. And this one goes in your butt. Shit, hang on a second. This one,
Hurry up!
this one goes in your mouth.
And he loved whipping those out for new hires. Not in a creepy way, I just realized that sounded creepy. It wasn't, I promise. It wasn't like a here, shove this in your butt scenario. It was more of a, hey, have I showed you my probes? Okay, that sounded bad too. I'm just gonna stop talking now.
Finally, we have voice technology. The other day, I made a phone call to a bank and a recording came on and said that your voice is being recorded for security purposes. Speech recognition is an artificial intelligence-based technology. It is an AI-enabled capability with a software algorithm that matches the identity of the customer's voice.
Okay, you clearly don't quite understand what AI or algorithms are, but sure, voice recognition is being used by some banks to make phone banking easier for their customers. And while voice prints are somewhat unique, there is some question at the moment as to just how secure this is, with, again, twins sometimes being able to fool the system. But some of the reasons why voice prints are unique are because not only of the physical characteristics of the vocal cords, but also because of behavioral characteristics, like your cadence or accent. Now, I know God made languages at the Tower of Babel and all, but are you really saying that babies born in Georgia have a Georgia accent when speaking English because God designed them that way and not because they just learned how to talk from other people that had Georgia accents?
Could it be possible that these breakthroughs were predicted in the Bible?
No, because if there were anything in the Bible that actually clearly predicted these specific technological breakthroughs, we would have heard about it by now, and we would probably be using the Bible as a guide for future research in order to develop more technology that we don't have yet. It's interesting how any time the Bible is claimed to have made a prediction about some new technology, this prediction is never discovered to have been about this technology until after the fact. As in, nobody in the 1800s was reading the Bible and getting from it that one day we would use retinal scans as a secure method of verifying somebody's identity. We only ever discover that this technology was predicted after we figure it out for ourselves.
In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, it says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse."
Oh, wow. Okay. Credit where it's due. This is not the verse that I was expecting to be brought up as proof that these new ID technologies were predicted in the Bible. I was thinking it was probably going to go to the fearfully and wonderfully made, or he knitted me in my mother's womb verses to say that we are all unique and so can use these various unique features that God made in these technologies. I never in a million years would have thought that anyone would ever claim that the "there's no such thing as atheists" verse was actually a prophecy about Apple FaceID.
Paul makes 4 observations here. 1. There is an unseen world.
No, he's talking about the invisible attributes of God, not of the world. It's supposed to be pre-answering the question, if God is real, why can't he show himself to us? And I think, judging by the graphics he's using here, that this unseen world is the microscopic world. Seems like a better way that God could have told us about the microscopic world would be to, explain how to build a microscope? That could have been quite helpful. But yeah, this verse is saying that God has attributes that you can't see. That's what it's saying, not that microscopic things exist.
And then 2, the things that are unseen were created, not evolved.
It doesn't say anything about evolution, so even if I grant that this verse is true and is meant to be interpreted the way you're suggesting here, we only have the fact that God made stuff. It doesn't say anything about how he made it. If evolution was one of the mechanisms, then that's how he made it.
And then he says, number 3, the unseen things could reveal that there is a creator, and he is God.
Well, you got one aspect of the interpretation of this verse correct. Congratulations?
And the 4th observation is, once these things were revealed by God, man would have no excuse for not believing in him.
Oh, there's 2 out of 4. 50%. Depending on the parameters of the class, that might be a passing grade.
The scripture says, so they are without excuse. Think about the backlash Paul received thousands of years ago making this statement.
Why? How is a dude receiving backlash for telling other people that he knows that they all secretly believe in the same God as him but refuse to admit it supposed to be relevant to this verse having predicted fingerprints being used to unlock phones?
For the invisible things of him. They had no way of knowing that there was an invisible world.
I mean, pretty much every religion has their gods living in a realm that was mostly inaccessible to mortals. That's just a religious thing.
What made no sense thousands of years ago make perfect sense today thanks to the invention of the microscope in 1590.
Yeah, there it is. There's the microscope. Well, like I said, it's talking about the invisible attributes of God, not an invisible realm of microorganisms. Unless God is a virus? I could see that. But yeah, notice the passage of 1,500 years between when you claim God told us about the microscopic world and the invention of the microscope. Was God incapable of giving Paul instructions on how to build a microscope? If for whatever reason he thought that giving us life-saving medical technology was a bad idea, could he not at least have been more specific with his prophecy about figuring out microbiology? If the best you can do for a prophecy is a verse that is obviously not talking about the thing that you claim it does, then, well, that's actually par for the course for biblical prophecy, so well done?
In conclusion, you've got your own personal fingerprints, you've got your own face, you've got retinal scans, and now you've got voice recognition. There's 4 different things that identify you from any other person in the whole world. It would be statistically impossible for evolution to be 50% accurate with fingerprints.
Okay, what does that mean? When you say 50% accurate, are you saying that you think that half of all people should have identical fingerprints? Or that half of everyone's fingerprints should be identical? Or something else? What does accuracy mean to you here? And how did you calculate your probability? At what point do you consider something to be impossible? And really, why are you even bringing evolution into this discussion? Fingerprints didn't evolve to be unique. The fact that they are unique is just a byproduct of how they developed. The evolutionary purpose for fingerprints is not identification. It's probably more along the lines of either helping us grip things or increasing our touch perception, or a combination of the two.
Yet personal identification by fingerprints have been 100% accurate for over 100 years.
Nope, no, absolutely not. It's one thing to say that every human has unique fingerprints. It is something totally different to say that other humans have been 100% accurate in matching fingerprints to individual people. There are actually a bunch of issues with fingerprint evidence that I didn't want to get into here, but suffice it to say for now that shows like CSI have greatly exaggerated how reliable fingerprint identification is. In most cases, it's done visually by a person, and to be qualified to testify as a fingerprint ID expert, all you need is a short course, which, depending on the institution you attend for that course, could be a weekend workshop or 2, or a few weeks worth of part-time study. Some states don't even require certification in order to be considered an expert witness for fingerprints. The qualifications are not equally lax everywhere. I mean, if you want to work for the FBI, you probably require significantly more training than if you want to work for your local police station in rural Idaho. But my point is that fingerprints are very much not 100% reliable for identification, even if they are 100% unique.
Consider the human body that has a brain that contains 80 billion neurons that produce thoughts and functions for the whole body.
Almost like a soul isn't required to drive the body, but the brain is enough.
Then I want you to consider the eye. It has over 2 million moving parts and can process 36,000 bits of information in an hour.
Oh, I was really expecting that number to be more impressive than that. Often when creationists are talking about the eye, they'll want to claim that human ingenuity cannot possibly equal what the eye can do. Well, as far as information processing is concerned, 36,000 bits of information every hour is 10 bits of information per second. The UNIVAC 1 computer from 1951 could process about 2,000 instructions per second, and each instruction consisted of 6 alphanumeric characters. So assuming 1 bit per character, that's 12,000 bits per second. In a computer from the 1950s. Nowadays, we have things like the Ryzen Threadripper 3990X, which can do 2.3 million instructions per second, with the instruction sets being significantly larger. 64 bits if I'm not mistaken. So eyes process things pretty quick, biologically speaking, but incredibly slowly, even by 1950s computing standards.
You know, really it does take a lot of faith to believe something this complex could be created without a creator.
Good thing nobody who doesn't believe in a creator would say that it was created without a creator then. Using the word creator in this context is basically the same as asking the question, when did you stop beating your wife? It presupposes certain facts that are not necessarily the case.
So right now, you have a decision to make. Either you are a product of an accident that happened billions of years ago, or you were created by God.
Well, I wouldn't phrase it as an accident, but yes, we are the results of naturalistic processes that trace their origin back billions of years. The atoms that make up your body were forged in the hearts of stars billions of years ago and then flung out into the vastness of space in supernovae. I mean, it's less poetic when you consider that that's true of literally everything, including your poop, but it's still pretty cool to think about.
If evolution is true, and you die, then you just cease to exist.
I mean, certainly that is what I personally believe, but that has nothing to do with whether or not evolution is true. There are plenty of people out there who believe that evolution is true and that there is an afterlife.
But if you were created by God, you will one day stand before Him, and your eternity may rest on the decision you make right now.
To rephrase, if everything I have said in this video doesn't convince you that God is real, you should believe anyway, because if you don't agree with me, you'll end up being tortured for all of eternity. Agree with me or burn in hell. The rest of the video is just preachy come to Jesus stuff, so we can skip that. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Michael Dominic. I'm not going to read through the whole thing verbatim, but basically he said that I have an admirable passion for God and have misinterpreted more information about God than anyone he has heard. When asked for clarification, he says that I know what the Bible says, but because I hate God so much, I purposely misinterpret it. Otherwise, there'd be no point in me making videos. I find this sort of comment to be particularly amusing because I have found time and time again that the interpretation of a particular verse or prophecy that is being put forth by an apologist relies on removing those verses from not only their context in the book, but from their historical and cultural context as well. If it's a misinterpretation to, say, read the verses in Isaiah that Christians get their ideas about Satan's origin from, point out that the book of Isaiah explicitly states that those verses are about a human king of Babylon, and so conclude that they're not actually about Satan, then I don't know how one would even go about finding out what the correct interpretation is in this instance, unless they're just presupposing their specific interpretation onto the text without regard for context. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Jeffrey Dahmer, Mark McManus, Mark Ketchum, Clint Eastwood, Lynn Dobbs, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the physical factors that cause the uniqueness of my channel. If you'd like to be 50% accurate according to evolution, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can also support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, links to social media, all the ways to support the channel, and to my other projects like my podcast with my daughter, can be found at links.vicerhino.com. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!